In this video, I'm going to answer the most burning questions you had about miniature painting. Now, no matter what stage we are at in our miniature painting journey, we all hit that desire at one time or the other to move beyond the level we are at. And it doesn't matter if you are just starting out or if you already won a golden demon or two, we have all been there. This is where this video comes in, and if you enjoyed, let me know, then I'll do more of them, as long as you bring up questions in the comments that will make me aware of what is missing in the YouTube sphere. So for this video, I picked your most burning questions, both beginner level and intermediate, to kickstart the way that you think about miniature painting, and that will help you get to where you want to be faster. So let's see what questions you had. How do you determine what brush might best fit your style, soft or firm, etc.? Now, I know the question about soft or firm might have just been an example, but there's a thing called snap with brushes, which is how much it tends to snap back into its shape after you use it. And I see it mentioned in brush reviews all the time, but I never understood why you would anything but a brush that snaps back into shape anyway. But what are the most important properties of a brush to look at? From my experience, I see two types of brushes used in miniature painting. One is a very small, thin brush like this one that people like to use when they have a very precise and meticulous painting style, where it is all about putting that tiny pixel in the exact right position, or when painting eyes. One downside to this is that you have to dip your brush into the paint a lot, and it limits you to a style of painting that is very centered around one technique and one type of brush stroke. Now, if that's your thing, that's fine. People create masterpieces with this type of brush all the time. To me, a brush is a tool, a means to achieve your goals. And you can either use a couple of specialized brushes, or you can use a versatile brush like I do. I like that I can dip my brush into paint that I prepared and then can go on painting for a long time. My style is a bit more illustrative, and I don't plan that much up front, which means I want to be able to think without my paint drying in on the brush. And I also want to be able to switch between a broad brush stroke and stippling while I work, which means the combination of a large belly, which acts as a color reservoir, and a sharp tip is what I'm looking for. You will have to find out what style of painting is fun for you, but also be aware that choosing a brush is just one piece of the puzzle. Which leads us to another question that did not come up directly, but is underlying a lot of the questions you had, and that is how important is the equipment that we use. And I want to touch on this because I think in miniature painting there is a bit of a misconception that I want to address. Gear is only going to get you so far. There's not that much difference between a $12 brush or a $1.2 brush if you don't have any experience with the techniques you want to use. You'll be bad at it either way. What gear can do is increase your quality of life while you're learning. And you can focus on what you want to learn, say glazing, a lot better if your brush is holding a lot of paint and you don't have to constantly dip to pick up new one. And things like not having stray hair sticking out from a cheap brush, ruining your blends, is of course helping tremendously. That way you can focus on laying down the sickest blends, or, and let me try to get this right, the most creamy blends, like the kids say these days. No one would disagree with the fact that a $1,000 tennis racket is all of a sudden going to magically help you hit every single ball and win games if you never played tennis before. Some of the questions you had have the underlying idea that if only you find that perfect thing, for example the best brush or the best way to blend, the perfect dilution, then the results will instantly be better. That is approaching the problem from the wrong angle, because nothing like that is going to replace practice, as we will see from the next question. When is a color over-thinned, under-thinned, and what does that look like? When is there too much or too little paint on the brush? Now, the easier part of this question is, when do you have too much paint on the brush? And there's actually a simple way to make sure you don't. And I do this all the time, no matter what my dilution is. I swipe the brush over a piece of paper towel. You can see the paint running right off the brush, and when you drag it again, it leaves a much more controlled stroke. Now, when we do edge highlighting, it's relatively simple to say a dilution ratio of 2 drops of paint and 1 drop of water is going to give you a satisfying result. But when you want a more striking result and put in that extra pronounced highlight, do you really need to dilute your paint at all, or is it fine to put in a dot relatively undiluted? Spoiler alert. It is. I can also give you a ratio for how to make a glaze consistency for orange over yellow that will give you a satisfying result. But you will be disappointed if you apply the same ratio to any other color, say a black over a blue, because it all depends on what hue you're using, what brand of color, what result you're looking for, and many factors more. And when we add more complicated shapes to the equation, there's no methodical way to create a walkthrough in video form that you will be able to follow to get exactly the same result, unless there's some device that projects experience directly into your brain.
I know how to paint awesome gradients on complex shapes.
Show me.
How to clean mold lines and flashing and tidy up gaps when the model is assembled. The best paint job in the world will struggle with a bad foundation. I already have a video about how I fill gaps after assembly. I prefer milliput over something like green stuff or liquid green stuff simply because I can sandpaper it. Another thing you can do is use 1 or 2 layers of super glue. You can also sandpaper it after it's dry, and this will always give you the smoothest results. As for flash and mold line, there's not really anything fancy I do. It's pretty straightforward. I get rid of the main mold line with a knife, especially if it's in a place that I can't properly reach, and then I use sandpaper to get a smooth surface. You can use rougher sandpaper in the beginning, but always make sure to use a finer grit for the last steps. Personally, I just like to hit it with a paper that you can use wet as a last step. And that leaves you with a surface that is perfectly smooth and ready to be painted. What is the best way to use sub-assemblies? I guess it would depend on what you prefer, what you're comfortable to work with, and what the purpose of the figure is. I don't think I'd ever use sub-assemblies for an army or a warband, because the old saying of if you can't reach it, then you probably can see it is true for me. Also, I'm lazy. For showcase pieces, I always do very little sub-assembly and I avoid it altogether if I can. I only do heads and helmets and maybe arms if they go on very simple like this. If you're doing sub-assemblies, the best way to paint these for me is to pin them on a piece of wire and stick them into cork, and that way I can paint them and only having to touch them once when I complete the assembly. I would like to see an in-depth guide about color choice. What is your thought process when you choose a color or a color theme? Oh boy, now here's another 20 minutes video in itself, but I'll tell you a few simple guidelines that I personally follow. Games Workshop is actually pretty good at coming up with color themes, and they also have a really interesting color wheel in this video where you have the primary and secondary colors in their range listed with their name. And they also show you the different shades of the hues with the added names. Now, when it comes to what colors to choose, don't overdo it with the primaries. Primary colors, when combined, can be really striking and create nice contrasts, like this red framing on the shoulders, and it separates the elements of the figure nicely. Now, one thing you don't want to do is add another primary to this. Then you will just overload the miniature and overwhelm the viewer. When combining primary and secondary colors, obviously complementary colors work, but always have a dominant color that covers most of your model and only put in a small area with the complementary color, like I did with Thor, Garadon here, or the orange and teal contrast on the turban of my rogue robot. In general, you want to limit your color palette, so find ways to reduce the number of different hues on a model. You can do that in multiple ways. One of them is simply using different shades of the same color, like different shades of green, or really similar hues from the wheel, like turquoise, which is just a bit off of green in this example. You can also desaturate your colors with black and off-whites, like I did here on my Crimson Fist, and just compare it with the initial example I showed you from the Games Workshop video. Of course, you can always add black and white to any composition, as they are not considered hues and they will not interfere too much with it. An important keyword here is readability. Through either your choice of color or the usage of different values, make sure that all elements are separated and identifiable. You want to use contrasting colors to distinguish parts of the figure so that the eyes and brains of a viewer have an easier time to see what's going on at a glance. That way you invite them to explore your miniatures further. A simple concept that we touched on in an earlier video is creating dark trims around bright shoulder guards or vice versa, even if the official color scheme demands the same color for the trims of the armor. Like I said, this topic is really extensive and I try to put as much color theory as possible into my videos. So if you want to see more of it, why not go and check out the extra 150 videos I have up on my Patreon and help me create more videos like this in the process. What do you think of Games Workshop colors and especially their pots? Okay, that was a bit dramatic. I really like Games Workshop Citadel colors. They're a bit more on the vibrant side, they are reliable, they're great colors, but they are really expensive. And when half of your paint is drying in because of the way their pots work, or let's say don't work, then, well. So what I do is I put the paints in dropper bottles, which is an extra expense and time investment, but at least the paint is now not going to dry in. When mixing colors to correct a mistake or doing touch-ups, how do you hit the exact color on the palette so it looks right on the model? A quick solution to this is always have a gradient of color for what you want to paint on your wet palette. Mix your highlight color in a good amount, and the wet palette will help you keep the paint usable for a long time. Then when you need to go back on some area, pick up the paint from the right spot in the gradient. Just remember that there's other ways to smooth out gradients than having to paint a perfect gradient from A to B. You can glaze over the whole thing with a similar color after you're done. To draw everything together, and also don't forget that you should not get too hung up on smoothness and perfection. You're using acrylic colors and you're not going to get these absolutely smooth blends that maybe you can achieve with oil paints. A lot of blending on miniatures is only done by tricking the eye into believing it is smooth. And don't forget that pictures on the internet are never going to show what you can see if your eyes are 2 inches away or through a magnifying glass. I don't use Citadel colors or any of the other big brands. It's difficult to mix colors to achieve what you are using in the videos and to create the correct texture. Well, yes, this is going to be a problem. There is conversion charts for the major brands out there, and in this document that you can download from the link in the description, you can sort by brand and get suggestions for color equivalents in the other brands. And the delta E is going to give you an idea about how distinguishable it is from the original. So let's think about why you would want to use colors that are not designed for miniature painting. And the only thing that I can think of is price. It's not a secret that a lot of these colors are really expensive, so cheaper alternatives would be nice. But bear in mind, apart from the markup of branding, the difference in price has to come at the expense of quality in the materials used. Emil from Squidmore Miniatures has made a video where he painted a Space Marine with IKEA colors, and the properties of these are just so different from what we are used to work with. While you can mix interesting colors from them, the pigment density is really poor and they barely cover on the miniature. So cheap paints are really not an option, and you got to be careful not to go too cheap. You can get double the amount of decent off-brand acrylics for the price of a Games Workshop bottle. But if you want to use these acrylics, you will have to settle on the fact that you will not hit every single color that is used in a tutorial. And honestly, you should not worry too much at this point and just embrace the thug life and run with the fact that you're creating your own thing here and experiment with what you can do with these paints. And like I said earlier, it's already really difficult to communicate color consistency in a video using the regular brands, and it's going to be impossible to do for brands that I don't even know. How do you choose colors for mixing? When you have a mid-tone color, how do you bring it up or down in value? I jump up too fast and my transitions look choppy. So we touched on this in the last video. If you go too bright too fast, why not take a highlight color that is not a huge amount brighter than your base color and go from there? like I did here with the skin tone and the black. You can use any color to highlight and shade. We're not limited to white and black for that. And 99.9999% of the time when people come to me and say, why do my gradients suck? Why is there chalkiness in my blends? The problem is that they are using white to mix a highlight color. Be responsible. Say no to white. It's literally the brightest option of paint in existence. Naturally, any mix you will do with it will be brighter and more difficult to blend with than any other mix with a lower value color. What are the steps to really push a miniature from a good model to a masterclass model? This is what's missing from YouTube. Yes, and there is a reason why this is missing from YouTube. One reason is that YouTubers are typically not master painters. Also, traditionally, there's no views to gain from this, because the answer to how to really push a miniature is most of the time going to be invest more time. Watching people paint miniatures for a longer period of time is not particularly engaging content. And everything these days is about speed and painting a maximum amount of minis in as little time as possible. This is also the reason why I have my more instructional, longer videos on Patreon. I still try to give you guys as much knowledge as possible on YouTube, but the video always has to be more on point and precise and narrated differently. It has to be shorter and more engaging. So back to the time factor and how it influences your painting results. Let's think of a technique that is really fast, say for example dry brushing. How do you make that look twice as good? Well, the answer is you take your time. You make sure that you apply the highlights more evenly, you mix an extra in between layer instead of just using a base color and a highlight, and that's going to make your result better and smoother. Now, as you progress in your painting journey, more and more things will become second nature. And through that will take up less time, and you will be able to produce better results faster, even using more advanced techniques. But you need to put in the time and practice these things. And it's fine if you don't want to, but quality and fast results are always going to be two ends of a spectrum. And while they don't have to be either or decisions, you can get nice looking gradients with dry brushing if you know how to, but you will have to make certain compromises between the two and figure out your personal good enough. You're watching Travarian Miniatures. If you like these type of videos giving you more condensed knowledge, then let me know. Like the video if it was helpful and subscribe if you are new here. If you do, don't forget to click the bell, because while I upload regularly, I don't have a schedule I can stick to. And you might miss a video if you don't. And don't forget, you can help me to create more and better videos by supporting my Patreon campaign, and you'll even get access to more videos and PDF guides if you do. Thanks for watching, stay creative, and see you next time.